is the thing.
Yeah.
No, but okay, let me give you
when you're starting.
Let me give you an example. Okay. I was at an event recently with some friends, and this friend of mine in a group of maybe 8 people made a comment that was completely counter to something that I have an opinion on. I'm not going to get into what that is because that's another issue. Right. But in that moment, I said nothing. I just sat there. I didn't laugh like everybody else. I just kept my mouth shut.
Right.
But I could follow up with that later on with that person one-on-one and say, hey, you know, at so-and-so's thing, you said this, and I just would love to hear what you have to say about that, and use it as a platform to have a conversation about it. Yeah. You know, and so I think that, you know, you can do that if the situation is wrong with someone that you know, and that way you're still holding true to what you believe. I think it's just making sure you're, you know, have the integrity to follow up with that.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Liz, because you're basically on the other side of the spectrum for me. Like it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds to me like you're not saying that you're on the perfect balance here either. You're suggesting you're just on the other side of the spectrum. Okay. So what I have found sometimes with other people that I know that fall on your side of the spectrum, and I just want to know, is this something that you ever see in you, or is this something you've recognized in other people? I've found a lot of times people it's more easy to kind of, you know, get really challenging with people when they, like, sometimes we kind of, I think, objectify the other person or even demonize them, you know, because they're pro-choice or into, you know, all kinds of things.
You can sometimes, it can be a bit of a struggle to see them as an opponent for me, or to see them, their arguments at least.
You're saying you easily see them as an opponent versus...
It's easy for me to slip into seeing them, and I wouldn't say that I dehumanize them, but sometimes I see them as a challenge to my arguments. It's a struggle for me to back off a bit and try to treat them like a normal person. Well, hey, what's your major? You know, when you're on a college campus, what do you do? Blah, blah, have a normal conversation, because I see it as, well, here's what I'm here for, is I want to talk them through these points, and it's logical, and I can do it nicely, but sometimes I have to back off and know that it's not a competition.
Yeah. Well, you know, listening to the discussion here, this is familiar to our podcast listeners who have heard me talk before. You have to know your audience. I think that's critical. Yeah. And I want to preface my comments with, in terms of finding balance and equilibrium and stuff, I don't believe there's ever an equilibrium with the abortion issue, because you are either legitimizing the destruction of innocent human beings or you're not. So when I say balance, I don't mean got to find we can both agree to disagree. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a finding of a balance with the discussion, and Josh, your point about this discussion with the scientist here, or the biologist, the balance is, on her side, she's a very intelligent person. She probably has a doctorate or two. She's in a debate, which means her mind is in high logic and critical thinking analysis mode. And she's willing to engage at that level. So the balance, in my mind, is you meet that. Ask the hard questions.
Well, she should know the answers.
Which she should either know or be ready to come up with an answer for, because it's that caliber of discussion. And now, through all of this, being kind and gracious is absolutely imperative. We treat the other person as a human being, but we can meet our discussion at the level that they're presented at. And the goal, my thought now, thinking about campus discussions, when I walk up to someone on campus, I don't know that I have the perfect system, but my goal is, you know, what do you think of this? So what's your major? You know, try and become the person to them first. Now, if their response will determine what I do next. If they're like, I think this is, and they're going to come on strong, well, I can raise, still being kind, I can raise the critical nature of my questions to a level where they're going to be put in a very tight spot. If their answer is very soft, I'll come in real soft. And you know, you talked about how do you close it? Like, you know, do you just let it naturally die? Do you naturally die wishy? Do you wishy-washy? Do you naturally die on a hot moment? My goal has been, and I don't know if I've been even remotely successful, but when I was thinking about this discussion for today's show, my goal is to come up with the close where I ask them a question and their best answer is, I don't really know. And then the last, I want to leave them with a thought from me and not a thought from them, because they're going to go on and think about it. But my last question I want to be, well, then how do we reconcile this on one hand and this on the other hand? and then just kind of let that be the close.
Yeah.
Where I've balanced it and then just tilted it my direction, which is the pebble in the shoe. But I've met all of their challenges and then tilted it.
Yeah.
So.
I was talking about this with my wife yesterday. I was like, we're going to be recording this podcast tomorrow. What do you think? Because he usually comes up with better thoughts than I do. And she made the comment that married people, begin to get experience in this. Because married people, when you're together, you're going to know this. Or at least maybe you're learning now. You got to learn how to challenge someone while being as tactful as possible.
Right.
And you're like, you have to be like purposeful about being tactful. And this is, we certainly learned this in our first year of marriage, where we had more, miscommunications would come up because, she asked something, but I misunderstood where she was coming from or what she was trying to imply with the tone of her voice, all the different things. And so she said, some of that could probably translate over to this topic. Thinking about how you will say things or how you will start conversations ahead of time so you can avoid missteps. Right. Preventing defensiveness by not sounding accusing. It's that tactfulness, the way that you ask questions.
Absolutely.
Instead of, how could you be for abortion? It's just like, it seems like abortion, it does these different things. How can we reconcile those things? Right. Being very clear about what you mean, so as to avoid miscommunication. But the problem with that one is it can be taken too far and turn into this thing. I've seen some pro-lifers do this where they're like very logical, and they literally make the other person define every single word.
That is so annoying.
Let's just have a normal conversation.
It's a semantical argument then. You just totally lose your point and you just get lost in the dictionary.
Well, no. The person I'm thinking of doesn't get lost because he's really brilliant, but the other person usually does. Where it's just like it gets to where you're out of balance.
The person who's trying to communicate.
You got to find some balance. I think tone and body language are crucial.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why it's so much more helpful when you do this stuff one-on-one versus online, where they don't see any of that.
Being
it's
normal.
Almost impossible to do it online.
You can still, I think online, if you're trying to use that, you can imitate their phraseologies.
Yes.
Yeah. There's certainly things you can do. I'm thinking of maybe writing a piece on ways that we can try to be as effective as possible online.
Gotcha.
I just haven't worked on it yet. But don't assume that you know what they think.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
And it never hurts to ask people what they think. People love being asked what they think.
Get your facts straight and then ask the question.
Right.
Don't, because I see people doing straw men all the time accidentally because they thought this person meant this, but they actually meant something completely different.
Right.
Avoiding strings of questions or statements that are like you, using, the you is just kind of, we want to have this kind of posture of we're thinking about this problem together.
Yeah. Right.
And let's kind of come across. We don't want to come off loud and accusatory.
You don't want to set up like A versus B opponent status.
I do want to just caveat here with what Kyle said. He said some really great things, and there are different types of personalities out there, and for the people who are kind of strong, in your face, just you can match them, and I think you're going to have much more successful conversation than you would with the average person. It's not the standard. It's the exception. But still, keep those things in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for our listeners that are like Liz, here's my suggestion: spend some time on pro-choice blogs. I've recently been on this one. It's Abortion Gang or Abortion Gangs. I think it's just abortiongang.com. Really, really smart young women that are very, very pro-choice. They're pretty extreme on the pro-choice end. Okay. I would really encourage. I think pro-lifers in general a lot of times don't try to understand or learn about pro-choice people enough, and being like on their blogs, not there to comment, just read what they have to say and where they're coming from. And then we won't objectify them so much.
Along those lines, don't read the pro-choice blogs to come up with the perfect counter argument. Right. The other thing, this is not a compromise of what your personal foundations are.
Right.
But taking some time to try and construct your best attempt at defending the other side.
Yeah.
Now, you can be a Christian and you can do it for atheism.
Yep.
Not to compromise your beliefs at all, but to understand and know how to dialogue better.
It's like when, Paul was, at Mars Hill and he sees, he's like looking at all the different altars and learning about then talked with them, more effectively. Yep. Now, if you're like me, then I think the best tip I can offer, and this is what Steve Wagner told me. I was discussing this specific topic with him. I was like, dude, this is what happens to me all the time. What can I do? And this was his tip for me was, then when you're in these conversations, go as far as what is comfortable for you, and then take it one more step further to where it's uncomfortable. And when I think of that, I think of it like if you're piloting a plane, it's like course correction. It's like, if you've ever done like flight simulators or anything, if you're trying to land the plane and you're a little bit off, going way to the right is not going to help. But that slight little course correction to try to line yourself and get back on track. And this just recently, I was on a plane from Las Vegas to Fresno. And I got to spend an entire 90 minutes talking about abortion with this like 60-something-year-old woman. I think her name is Pat. She might be listening. I told her about the show, and she said she was interested. I actually invited her to come on the show. And it was wonderful because she was interested in what I had to do. She thought what I do is, I talked about, listening to understand and finding common ground and having good, effective conversations with people without all the yelling. And she was like, I think that's great. I am pro-choice. And so we spent, now half an hour into our discussion, we easily could have stopped. We kind of gone through sleds. We'd done literally everything but size and sled and kind of gone through. And, she was kind of agreeing, I guess I don't really have a reason to say that that's relevant, but I'm still kind of pro-choice. And there were times where I could have just let it die. Right. And we could have spent the rest of the plane. I could have been listening to my iPod or we could have been talking about something else, but I pushed it. I'm like, I still don't understand. Why are you pro-choice then? Because it seems like you agree with me that level development's not relevant. And see, why are we discriminating against? You got to come up with something else. What do you? Let me see what you got, kind of thing.
And what was her reaction to you pushing her?
It was great. She was fine because she was like, we were in the mode of, boy, I think it's great that people can have a dialogue. Let's talk about this stuff. We spent the entire 90 minutes doing this because I kept pushing it and I just want to help. I was really nice about when I asked the questions, but that it seems like we agree that it's wrong to discriminate based on race and gender. Why are we discriminating against the unborn? Because it just seems like another form of it seems like and in the end, she kind of agreed with a lot of my points, but she didn't become pro-life. And I think I was really interesting. She basically, well, she said, I'm kind of still pro-choice, but she admitted a lot of that had to do with her background, her previous life experiences that had kind of made her that way, and she felt like she wasn't being open-minded enough, and she wanted to try to work on that. But so that is kind of, I think, the model that we want to go for. Closing thoughts.
When you mentioned that you could have let it die, but then you pushed it and she was very receptive. I know there are times when it looks like it's that natural death.
Right.
I'm going to push it and just see, and the response I get is, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Right. And that is now
then you let it go.
The complete closure of the discussion. So you let it go. You don't try and push beyond that.
Yeah.
I would say, just as an encouragement, starting a conversation and pushing a conversation at any level for both people like me and people like Josh is going to be uncomfortable, especially the first few times.
That.
And so you've got to expect that.
Yeah.
And I would just say on top of that, practice. You practice other things. Go through, make sure you know what you believe and you're solid so that you feel confident when you're going into that so you can go the extra distance.
Okay, question for our listeners. Have you found something that consistently goes wrong when you have these conversations or goes right? Email them to me because there's stuff, techniques that I haven't thought of but could be helpful for our listeners or our viewers. And so email me what works for you and we'll cover it on a future show.
Awesome.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.